Hey guys, Matt here. Getting into Hebrews 11 today. Hebrews 11:8. We're going to look at Abraham, the life of Abraham. Hebrews 11:8. By faith, Abraham, when he was called to go out to a place that he was to receive as an inheritance, that's the land of Canaan, the promised land, and he went out. He obeyed, not knowing where he was going. By faith, he went to live in the land of promise as in a foreign land, living in tents. It's going to come up to be a big deal, living in tents with Isaac and Jacob, heirs with him to the same promise, of the same promise, for he was looking forward to a city that has foundations, whose designer and builder is God. Right? So we see faith here being invisible. He didn't know where he was going, it being in the future. He was looking forward to the city that has foundations, whose maker and builder is God. The city that has foundations, I think this is a reference to Revelation, where there's the foundations are the 12 jewels, which are the 12 apostles, and which is the New Jerusalem, of course. Verse 11, by faith, Sarah herself received power to conceive even when she was past the age, since she considered him faithful who promised. Right? She didn't look at her circumstances. Faith doesn't reason. Faith doesn't look at logic. Faith looks at him who made the promise, and him who made the promise is good, right? Therefore, from one man, Abraham, and him as good as dead, he was old, were born the descendants as many as the stars in heaven, and as numerous, or innumerable, as the sands on the seashore. All right, so who is this Abraham? Abraham was an interesting character. He's the father of faith, right? And yet, we're going to see that Abraham's faith wasn't perfect immediately. I mean, when we're born, it's a gift from God. We have nothing to do with it. It's faith that is a free gift, faith in Jesus Christ. But then there's this faith that we have to exercise, right? Our faith has legs. It walks, it breathes, it moves, because him who promised it is good. We count on God, and God helps us to perfect that faith. We see that in Philippians 1:6. He who has begun a good work will continue it to the day of Jesus Christ, right? We'll see that in Hebrews 13:5, that he will never leave us or forsake us. We see it in a lot of verses where God helps work out our faith. Look at the parable of the talents. You want more faith? Exercise the faith that you have. To him who has, much more will be given. So this Abraham had to exercise great faith, and God helped him along the way. We're going to see that. He lived in the land of Ur of the Chaldees. The land of Ur of the Chaldees was a very, very rich land. In fact, in his commentary, Steve Matheson of Equip the Saints brought up the fact that they excavated the land of Ur, and they found hot tubs, what they thought was hot tubs, and underground plumbing. That's a big deal. That's a long, long time ago. The point is it was a rich, wealthy land. And Abraham was a rich and wealthy guy. He had 318 armed guards. He had servants on top of that. And on top of that, he had all the guards and the servants' families to take care of, to feed every single day. He had kind of like a mini little nation, right? And yet, when he got the call of God, he moved. He left it all behind. He laid it all down to dwell in tents. But the interesting thing is it didn't happen overnight, and we start to see in Abraham, we start to see that he held too tightly his family, which we see that brings it kind of culminates in him having to sacrifice Isaac. We'll get to that. But Abraham gets called to leave, and he does. But they go from Ur, they want to go to Canaan, and they don't want to go through the desert, so they go up the Euphrates, and they stop in a land called Haran. And they stay there for a while. And this is where we start to see Abraham maybe holding too tightly to his family. He was still under his father's yoke. His father's name was Terah, which means to delay. And he did delay Abraham. He didn't leave right away. In fact, Abraham didn't leave till his father died. Okay? And he took Lot with him. So Abraham and Lot and his wife Sarah and all his people that came with him went to Canaan, the land of promise, and yet when they got there, they found that God's will had a famine for them. Clearly God was testing him, as God will do to us, let us go through the desert. And Abraham went down to Egypt where he knew there was food. God didn't tell him to go to Egypt. Okay, and when he got down to Egypt, he had his beautiful bride, Sarah. She was 65, and yet she was beautiful. And Pharaoh wanted to have her. Abraham schemed, knowing that Pharaoh would want her, and knowing that Pharaoh would likely kill him. Instead of trusting God, he schemed and said, Sarah, tell him you're my sister. God gives Pharaoh a dream and warns him. Pharaoh says, Abraham, why'd you do that? Get out of here. But here we see, again, where Abraham is kind of finagling and kind of holding his family a little bit too tightly. They finally leave. They go back to the land of Canaan, and we see that this begins a long period of Abraham being purified. His character was being purified by God. Abraham and Sarah had to wait 25 years to get their son, right? And yet, when they finally got the son that they waited so long for, the son of promise, God tells him to lay him down on the altar. And this is God's way of always, I believe, hitting us in our point of weakness, hitting us in our point of, would you say, idolatry, maybe? God knows what we need to lay down. In fact, in next week, in Hebrews 12, we're going to see that the author tells us to lay down our besetting sins, but also the things that weigh us down. Sometimes it's not even sin, it's just things that weigh us down. Abraham had to do that with Isaac. We see this as a precursor to Jesus Christ being sacrificed for us. But more than that, in this instance, it was God saying, you need to lay down your son. I need to show you that I'm going to develop this faith in you. In fact, after Abraham had his name changed from Abram to Abraham, he was mentioned 231 times, and every time he was mentioned in regards to faith. But here we see where his faith really grew, where he was going to lay down his own son that he waited for. And the point is that God will not have anything getting in the way of him and us, even our family. And Jesus says, if you love your father and mother more than me, you are not worthy of the kingdom, right? He warns us to not hold our family too tightly, right? If you seek to gain your life, you're going to lose it. We shouldn't hold anything too tightly, whether it's family or whatever. So here we see God saying to Abraham, I'm going to have you sacrifice your pride and joy, this promise that you waited for, on the altar. And the author is reminding the Jews of this because Abraham was a great man of faith. He did what God asked him, and God rewarded him. God didn't punish him for his faith. God provided the sacrifice, right? But in our lives, how that would apply itself in our lives is we need to look at what we need to lay on the altar. And when I was reading this, there's a couple things that God laid on my heart that I need to lay down on the altar. And I think the challenge for us today is, what do you, providing that you're born again, providing that you have a relationship with Christ. If you don't, you need to have that first. But if you're born again, what do you need to lay on the altar today? What is it? Could it be, I'm not going to name it, you know, it's different for everybody. It could be TV, it could be movies, it could be magazine, it could be something you're reading, something you're eating, something you're drinking, whatever. But God spoke to my heart about a couple of things that I need to lay down on the altar, and He's very serious about wanting us to have nothing in the way. And sometimes these things can be subtle. Sometimes these things can be they can be things that we can say, oh, well, we're covered by grace. We don't have to worry about this. We don't have to worry about that. But secretly, they're holding us back. So the challenge for us today is, like Abraham was called a friend of God. And I think the call for us is to be a friend of God. It's not just to be saved. It's to walk with God. Like Enoch walked with God. That's a big, big deal. So what do we need to lay down today? That's the challenge for today. And it's for me too. There's a couple things that I need to lay on the altar. How about you? Peace.